To all who shall see these presents, greetings. Ruckdog here, and I'm back. It's been, well, shall we say it's been a bit longer than I had initially intended between this video and my last one. My apologies for that. But given the fact that we just got a full round of updates to all of the major ORBATs for Dystopian Wars 3.0, it seemed like this would be as good of a time as any to jump back into it and try and get back up on the old horse here for making videos. So here we are. Let's go ahead and get started. So the topics for this video, well, we're going to take a look at a summary of the major changes, and then we're going to talk about some game design trends I've been noticing over the course of the past year or so as we've gotten a progressively more complex set of ORBATs for the game. And then finally, I'm going to look at a little bit of by the numbers in terms of comparing where we're at for the various factions in the game. And then, of course, we'll just have a final roundup discussion, some thoughts before we close out the video. So let's go ahead and get started with a summary of major changes. So the big one here is that most of the Mass 3 and Mass 2 models had a boost in their armor and a slight reduction in their speed. All right, so if I can, let me go ahead and swap over to my little highlighter tool here. And so you can see that we've got right here, the speed has dropped by 1 inch for both battle ready and crippled here on our Antarctica superiority cruiser. But this armor value has also gone up, right? It's now +1 from what it used to be. The other thing we saw was a generator cost adjustment. Most generators got cheaper. Really what this means, right, when I say cost adjusted downwards, what we're really talking about is whenever you have the option to swap out one of your primary weapons mounts and replace it with a generator, instead of having to pay for that generator or even for the generator being free, it actually makes the model less expensive, right? Minus 10 points. And so what it's saying is heavy gun batteries, right? So here we have our weapons, and these heavy gun batteries are clearly the primary weapon system for this particular ship. It's the Constitution battleship for the Union. And you can see that we can replace a single heavy gun battery with one of the generators listed here, Atomic, Fury, Magnetic, or Shroud. And by doing so, it'll drop the cost by 10 points. So that's 250 points cost up here would instead become 240. The natural follow-on result of this is that it's now a bit more attractive and a bit more cost-effective to bring generators into your force. And I think that is a good change because I suspect what this is intended to address is a problem or a challenge where it seemed like it was always better just to have the extra gun, just have those extra attack dice instead of giving up some of those attack dice for a generator of some kind. So this will hopefully make the whole generator option a little more appealing to players, and we'll see that. Now, I do want to follow up here with a couple, or at least one specific case, right? So here, the Antarctica superiority cruiser, going back to this one right here, it already starts with an internal shield generator, right? So you don't have to replace any of these weapons with a generator to get a generator on the ship. So instead, you can swap out that shield generator for a different type, Atomic, Clone, Fury, Magnetic, Null, or Shroud, because, you know, Enlightened, they get all kinds of fun toys. And you actually pay a little bit of an additional cost. Now, it's a flat 5 points for any one of the generators. That is a change from what it used to be. Because if we flip back over to the old Antarctica superiority cruiser here, you see that what we had was this chart right here, where you had all of these different generators, and some were free, some were 10 points. And by shifting it to this model, everything is now a flat 5 points. But that's only if you want to replace that internal shield generator. If you're okay with the internal shield generator, you can leave it as is, and you don't have to pay any additional points. Oh, and this is also a good way to see here the old armor values of 5 and the old speed of 8 and 6 compared to 7 and 5 for speed and 6 and 6 for armor. All right, so let's talk about some generator changes, okay? There were a few changes made to the generators beyond just their price. And I'm going to break this up into a couple different discussions. The first one's going to be on general generators. And what I mean by this, these are generators that pretty much all of the factions have access to. These are not faction specific. So atomic generator used to give you a +1 to your citadel value when used, but no longer. So you lose that little bit of a buff. The fury generator used to give you a +2 speed boost. Now it's only a +1 speed. The repulsion field generator is a little bit better because it now grants you +2 for your submerged defensive values, right? So the ability to sort of move over models is still there, but now you also get some additional defense value, which can be helpful. Now, the shroud generator allows you to be ignored as the initial target for an attack. So what that means is if I am shooting at a unit and the model has the closest model, I should say, has a shroud generator, I'm actually allowed to ignore that model and target another model in the unit. So that is, I believe, intended to be a downside because it prevents you from sort of tanking damage or tanking attacks with your shroud generator equipped model inside your unit. A little situational, but I think this is all reasonable. What we're really seeing here in all of these changes is, I think, some accommodations for the fact that we have, in a lot of ways, made all of these generators cheaper, right? Because you have to remember, one of the most common ways that all of these generators are going to get taken on models is that they are going to be replacing a gunnery mount for a reduction in cost to the model. And so because of that, you have to also account for some tweaks in here to make them somewhat less effective. Finally, the magnetic generator. This has some specific things in there where it can now place disorder on an aerial model within 10 inches. This is a useful change because, well, let's be fair. All of these generators in some form were included in the original rulebook, the core rulebook. And since then, since the beginning of the year, we've actually gotten things like aerial models into the game. So now it makes sense to incorporate some additional rules that maybe make those aerial models a little more vulnerable to some specific situations and some specific attacks that they weren't otherwise vulnerable to. Okay, so that's all of the sort of the general generators, the universal generators, if you want to call them that. So now let's talk about some faction-specific generator modifications, right? So first off, the Enlightened have their null generator, right? It used to disable a generator on an enemy model, but now it also places that generator offline critical marker. Now, don't get too excited. This cannot cause a catastrophic explosion because if the unit already has a generator offline marker, you don't get to put a second one on there, which is nominally the condition that would trigger a catastrophic explosion critical result. However, the fact that you are putting that marker on to the model means that it is now that much more vulnerable to a catastrophic explosion from another attack. The cryo generator, this is the unique generator for the Commonwealth. This is the one that allows you to generate icebergs from your ship, right? But this is a new wrinkle. You now have a direct, I should say attack, excuse my spelling, a direct attack option instead of just those icebergs. Now, it's not a stupendous attack, but it's nothing to sneeze at. It gives you 8 dice in both the point blank and closing range bands. And that attack has the blast, hazard, or hazardous, and the devastating qualities. Now, this blast one is especially interesting because remember, this is where you take your template, use the circular portion of it, and everything underneath that circular template, friend or foe, takes this 8 dice attack. So this is a potentially deadly thing to be using against small mass 1 models, basically, your frigates, your Zebics, that type of thing. So yeah, this is a pretty significant change for your Commonwealth players out there. Then we have the Trident generator for the Crown. So it reduced cost, but also lost the sustained quality. So a little bit of a wash, overall toning down. You can call it a nerf, but at the same time, it also has a cheaper cost to put onto your ships. So probably about a wash overall. All right, so now let's talk about some trends in ORBATs, right? So this is just some design things I've noticed, things that have changed over the course of this past year. So first of all, we're starting to see more and more uniqueness between the factions, okay? And I think it's fair to argue that at its initial release, with just the core rulebook and the Hunt for Prometheus starter box, and even after the first round of the placeholder ORBATs came out, that a lot of the game was very same because everybody was more or less using the same universal generators. Everybody was using the same basic weapon stat lines. But ever since then, as we've gotten more and more releases and the ORBATs have gone under revision, we are starting to see some additional bits of national flavor sort of creep into the various factions. Some of this is in the form of unique generators. So if you flip back to the previous slide where we were talking about things like the Trident generator for the Crown or the Cryo generator for the Commonwealth, those are unique to those factions, and they do give a distinct feel to how they play. The weapons profiles, so we do have those generalist weapons that are listed in the core rulebook, but now we're starting to see more and more weapons profiles that are only for that faction. Various etheric and particle weapons for the Covenant. You got your various arc weapons for the Imperium. So we're starting to see some breakout in those areas as well. I think we're seeing efforts afoot to try and keep models on the table for a little bit longer. This is where that armor increase is really targeted at. I didn't go into specific details, but looking through the ORBATs in their totality, I did notice a few areas where hull points got boosted as well. And the fact that we now have generators being a option, or a more viable option, I suppose I should say, because they are cheaper to take. They reduce the cost of your model, and that makes them, the opportunity cost equation look a little bit better in their favor. You're probably going to start seeing some more of those generators, things like shield generators and shroud generators, things that make ships harder to hit and therefore will help keep them on the table longer. Early in the game, again, going back to earlier this year when we just had the initial round of ORBATs and to go off of, it was sort of like, how much offense can I pack onto the table for the least amount of points, for the most efficient points. There wasn't much point in trying to worry too much about your defense because everything in the game could die pretty quickly. Now, don't get me wrong, the game is still plenty killy. Things still die pretty quick, but we are starting to see a little bit of a shift towards that survivability angle, and we'll probably see that in the future, I suspect. One other thing I noticed is we're also starting to see an increasing divergence between what we have in the core book and the ORBATs. The core rule book really hasn't been updated since it initially went online back in the spring. So that means that the generator rules, for example, are now no longer aligned with some of the special rules that are in the ORBATs. So I'm wondering if that means we might see an update to the rulebook. Do we have a revised rulebook in our future at some point in the not too distant future? I don't know. Again, taking the generators as a specific case, I don't know if what we'll see is changes to the generator rules in the core rulebook to match what's in the ORBATs, or if we'll see the generators get removed from the core rulebook entirely, and it'll just become another thing that's only covered in the ORBATs. I really don't know. It's possible. We'll just have to kind of wait and see what direction Warcradle takes it in. Okay, so let's talk about some numbers here. So what I've got here is an array that shows you all the different factions. Here's our 8 factions that we've got in the game, right? And this is just a 30,000 foot view of page counts for ORBATs, right? And I think this is interesting, so bear with me. What you see is that our highest point value is the Imperium with 25 pages in their ORBAT. And the Commonwealth and the Enlightened and the Empire are not too far behind at 22 to 19. Then we've got a couple in the mid-teens, the Union and the Crown. And then finally, at the very bottom, we have the Alliance and the Sultanate. And this is all interesting, right? Because what this really shows is that if you look at basically the 2 factions the game launched with, the Enlightened and the Commonwealth, and then the faction that's gotten the most releases so far, things like the Ice Maiden and the various Battlefield boxes, the Imperium, they are clearly kind of in a category by themselves up here. It's sort of like your A tier of factions right now. And then you've got some factions that, and I should also add, of course, the Empire is in that mix as well, just based on the fact they've gotten a couple of box sets now. Now, also in that mid tier, now we've got the Crown and the Union. These are the factions that have gotten their fleet boxes, their first fleet boxes, and their frontline squadrons, but they really haven't gotten much yet in the way of additional expansions and variety. So their options are still somewhat limited. And then the Alliance and the Sultanate, I mean, just point blank, they're extremely limited. They're still operating on their placeholder ORBATs. They haven't gotten their starter boxes, their fleet boxes released yet. So they're still sort of in the third string, very much also rans as far as this goes. But that'll change over time here in the near future, I'm sure. So battle fleet options, this also sort of bears out. Here's the number of battle fleets that you have that you can take out of the front of the ORBAT. As we saw here with our A tier, you've got your Enlightened, your Commonwealth, the Imperium, and the Empire, all with about 5 different options. The Union and the Crown, again, you see there in that second tier with a couple of each. And then, with their placeholder ORBATs, the Sultanate and the Imperium, they only have 1 each. So that just goes to show you that as far as your different, basically your bag of tools and your variety for the Alliance and the Sultanate is just not quite there yet. Unique stat lines. So this is just me scanning through the ORBAT, and anywhere there is a unique stat line, i.e. battle ready and or crippled stat lines, I just counted them up real quick, and the trend holds. Although, interestingly, you see that the Commonwealth is a little bit lacking just in terms of that variety department compared to the Empire, the Enlightened, and the Imperium. Not saying that that's a huge deal. A lot of these numbers can be explained by a wealth of named ships in those factions. But again, the tiering system that we just talked about sort of still holds true. Okay, so final thoughts. Well, I'll say this was a solid update to the ORBATs. I think that this is going to bring some great changes to the game. I think that at least the attempt anyway, to try and strengthen the defensive capabilities of a lot of the models in the game is a step in the good direction. Everybody likes a explodey killy game, but sometimes you would like your models to try and stay on the table for at least a little while, maybe at least past turn 3 or so. And then the changes in this ORBAT should help a lot of those models be able to do that. I think this is encouraging that we are seeing, the sustained level of commitment and engagement. Warcradle, from what I've gathered, has taken lots of player feedback into account in terms of the changes they made to the game and the modifications and the tweaks they're making. So hopefully that will continue as well. And, as I was going through it, it just makes me think back to the first year of the original Dystopian Wars, right? And the options that we had, or in a lot of cases didn't have, in terms of factions and variety inside a faction. And I have to say that from my perspective anyway, I think Warcradle is doing pretty good in this regard. They are putting out a range of models and the rules to support them that, once we get through a full year, is easily going to match or maybe even exceed what Spartan was able to do in their first year. So I think good on them for that. I have seen some folks, and this actually brings up my next point, that I've seen some folks say that the fact that we're seeing these updates coming to the ORBATs is somehow evidence that Warcradle didn't do their homework, or there wasn't enough time and effort put into the development in the first place. Otherwise, they wouldn't have to change things so much. And I sort of reject that view because it's sometimes easy to forget. But if you really look at what was going on, right, in like the 2012 timeframe, as the first round of Spartan factions and releases were rolling out, you really get the sense that there was some rocky travels going on there as well, just because Spartan was undergoing such rapid growth and trying to push out models so fast that they were seeing some of the same problems. And That's why we very quickly ran to, edition 1.1 and edition 1.2, and then all the way to edition 2, a year or two later, and all these various different changes that were happening to the original Dystopian Wars. I mean, if anything, I think we're seeing less churn in terms of rules from Warcradle with their edition of the game. So, if anything, one, I think the fact that they're still engaged, again, this goes back to continued engagement, which is something that's very important. And the steady updates, which is also important, that we have a steady drumbeat of updates coming to the game, are very good things. And I'm personally happy to see them. Okay, well, that's about it for this video. I think I've rattled on enough here. Thank you so much for watching. I am definitely going to try and get back onto a more regular schedule for these videos. The next thing I want to start doing, at least in terms of Dystopian Wars, is start going through the ORBATs for each faction in a little more detail. Probably start with the Commonwealth faction and then the Enlightened. Those are the two that I have the most experience with, but I do eventually want to touch on all 8 of the main factions and try and get that done here in the next, I don't know, 2-3 weeks or so if we can. And then we'll just have to move on from there. Now, as for the channel as a whole, for the Man Battle Stations channel, I do have some plans to do additional videos that are not just Dystopian Wars, right? So there's other naval games out there I've been wanting to talk about on a video format. I still have aspirations of doing some kind of video battle report at some point. And I also want to do some video playthroughs of various games that are out there. Sort of Let's Plays, but for tabletop gaming. I have lots and lots of rule sets for various naval games, and I'm just wondering if there might be some interest in taking some of those, setting up a demo on a table, recording myself playing through it, and putting it up for you guys to appreciate. Anyway, if you have any comments or suggestions or thoughts on that, feel free to leave me a comment in the comment section. You can also head on over to the Man Battle Stations forums. I'll be putting up a thread on the forums for this like I usually do. But yeah, until then, this is Ruckdog saying good luck and good hunting.